Welcome to Citizens for Community Media. This is Peter Helland, and you'll see Robert Smith. He's familiar, and you may not be familiar with Earl Townsend Jr. But actually, I'd like us to kind of be able to hear from Earl a little bit more because he's going to have to leave after about a half an hour. The title of the show here is Community Concerns, and Earl was just sharing something about where we're at. I've never heard anybody say that, but where we're at, he says, they used to have dances. So Earl goes way back. And the three of us meet a couple times a week, Martin Luther King Jr. Senior Men's Club, and we discuss the things that are most important that should be discussed in a community.
Right.
And Earl is very interesting because he is a coach. He's kind of a well-known coach. Earl, tell us, what kind of coaching do you do, or did you do? Was it football? Was it...
Well, I was a former teacher, coach in South Bend. I started coaching in 1970 in Elkhart, Indiana. Then I ended up coaching here in South Bend, Clay Middle, Clay High. I also was a varsity coach at Adams, and I taught school for 27 years here, and I retired in 2002.
Right, and a lot of things that we discuss is the importance of school, and most of us are a lot older, and we're very concerned on that a school be successful. And then coaching tends to fit in with a lot of things. It fits in with parenting, it fits in with teaching, and there's certain principles that you become wise to as to what makes good coaching. And those are some of the things we discuss.
Right. Yes. Coaching really teaches kids the life skills that they need. It teaches them about success, failure, how to handle each of those, and discipline, and so a good coach is worth more than what he or she is paid for. But then Earl also taught school, and then teaching school 25 or 30 years ago, it is different than teaching school today. And then Earl can share some of his concerns about teaching school today as opposed to 25 or 30 years ago.
Yes, because you substitute teach now and then.
Correct.
And so you're fresh as to the difference between when you were teaching and how it is now. Of course, things always change, so it's not like that's a shock. But what do you see, the good things and the bad things? What do you see happening?
The only problem I see right now is too much testing compared to when I was in school. You know, I-step tests. They used to have the graduation tests. And testing really, to me, doesn't prove to anyone that you're going to be successful. And I think it's all about money, because if you get the test scores up, the corporation gets so much money. But mostly the time, a lot of these kids cannot test. A lot of people, like my sister, for instance, she was on the National Honor Society, but she could never really get a good score on the SAT test because she's not a testing type of person. Mm-hmm. So I see a problem with that. A lot of kids, and when you talk about the I-step test, when a kid in the 5th grade got to go 3 days taking a test, that's, I just think that's wrong.
So in other words, success is too much labeled by how well you do on those tests, where I bring it up, that the Indiana Constitution, under its Article 8 on education, says the purpose of school is to encourage, by all suitable means, moral improvement. So based on that, success would be how well morally you're doing. Because you could have a child that's very successful as far as certain worldly standards, but could be a disaster morally. And you wouldn't think you had a successful child.
Right.
Right? And so, but coaching and teaching has moral principles, right? I mean, when you're coaching, you're concerned about right and wrong even when you're coaching.
Correct.
Because if the children under your discipline don't respond correctly, you take action. I mean, isn't that what good coaching involves?
Correct.
And also, the Indiana Constitution does state what the purpose of public education is. There is seldom a school system in this state that is trying to achieve that goal, and we have just elected politicians. We have hired staff at school, and they all are missing that goal for public education as stated in the Indiana Constitution, and such that there needs to be something to focus attention on what the goal is. And also, one of the ways of getting kids to focus on that goal, it is to get them interested in athletics and various sports after school, and then through that they can learn some moral values, and those values will stick with them through life, because sometimes a child cannot learn failure, or a child cannot learn from failure just in the classroom, because some teachers tend to punish a child for failure. Some parents tend to punish a child for failure. But you must learn from your failure such that you can go forward. And in playing football or basketball, if you miss a pass, miss a play, you don't hang your head. You get yourself ready for the next play, and then that's easily taught in a sporting setting. And so maybe Earl can share some light on how he has taught kids to handle failure.
Well, my coaching philosophy was always, I really didn't teach. I was a coach, but I also was a teacher. And every team I have had over the years, I didn't teach them about basketball. I taught them about life. I used to tell all my players that you're not going to be a professional player, but you might be a father someday. You might have to pay bills someday. You might get laid off from a job someday. You might have a divorce someday, or you might have a death in your family. So these are the things I taught all of my kids through the sports. And I thought that was more important. And I did win games because once you teach these things, you're going to have character. And when you have character, you mostly can win with character.
Right, right. Of course, I'm thinking of sports. I'm from Wisconsin, and I was watching a documentary how the Packers were terrible before Vince Lombardi. And then he came in, and the players were not that good. Bart Starr was like 16th round draft choice from Alabama, but Lombardi put a team together, and he would go to mass every morning. And Lombardi was strict. I mean, he knew what was right and wrong, and he held them accountable. Mm-hmm. But that galvanized the Packers, and then boom! I mean, they played Philadelphia Eagles, Norm Van Brocklin. You probably remember that. And then boom, they were off and running. But he first established character, And then that created a good chemistry. And
Yeah.
you saw that, I mean, you understood that.
Right.
And as you said, the players, they were not star players.
No.
Vince took ordinary players, and that's similar to what Belichick does with the New England Patriots. Just take ordinary players, but the one thing he requires of his players, it is that they demonstrate a strong character. He can take an average player, make that person a star on the field, and that's been proven for the last 6 championships that they've had, and so it just goes to show that once you can put good character into a person, that person can achieve goals. They can they don't let failure define them. They can go on from a failure, and today there are hundreds of things that kids can participate in, and football and basketball is not the only thing. There's gymnastics, there's hockey, there's many things.
Well, okay, you got coaching, teaching, parenting, and then you have the Indiana Constitution where it says the purpose, number one purpose is to encourage by all suitable means moral improvement.
Right.
So how do we put those together? What do we see? Is there a common thread here? What are the principles that are involved in the school? It's to encourage moral improvement, but that's part of a goal of a parent in the children, right? You're trying to success from a Christian parent's point of view is precisely that, moral character. And even as a coach, so if everybody's on the same page and the community's on the same page and you're working toward that, but if everybody's on a different page, you could have, there's no common definition of success. Just winning was not what you were aiming at directly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and also when I was in school more than 50 years ago, we did not have police officers in the hallways. We did not have teachers that were acting as truant officers or teachers that were acting as prison guards. Each child from his parents, they were taught to respect one another, and then that teaching of respect started at home, and it went to the school, and the teacher is expected that respect. If the teacher did not get it, that teacher would let the parent know, and then just between the teacher and the parent, that respect was gained within a day. Like it did not take 30 days, and so that's one of the difference I see today versus 50 or 30 years ago. That respect that is ingrained or taught by the parents to the child does not appear to be there.
Well, Earl is always talking about, we know how, I can picture how Earl coached and taught. He was from the old school, and you demanded respect.
Right.
It wasn't an option.
Right.
And you had a right to demand it. One of my favorite scriptures, which is the most radical, where Jesus is admonishing them. He's saying, "Why don't you obey God's commandments?" And then he lays out one of the commandments. He said, "Why don't you obey the one you're supposed to honor your parents? And whoever speaks evil of his parents is to be put to death. How come you're not obeying that?"
Right.
Well, that as a shock, but it's saying that children are to respect their parents.
Right, right, right. And also, when you read the Ten Commandments, that commandment about children honoring their parents, it is the only one that gives punishment if you don't follow that, you know. The other 9 does not list any punishment if you fail to follow those. But the one to honor your parents does have punishment with it, and then that should be something that we today should look at, and to say that if that was so important to God, shouldn't it be important to us?
Right. In Proverbs, he that spares the rod hates his child. So you could say, in the name of love, you spare the child, and I'd say, well, your notion of love is a little bit off, because it says he that spares the rod hates the child. Mm-hmm. You know, oh, I love my child. You better not. No, but sometimes they need to be disciplined.
Right.
So I know, Earl, you're going to have to run. You got anything you might want to add to that?
No, I would just like to say about the education. It's just totally different now than it was, because I feel that public schools is really geared for college students, because you got to take foreign language, you got to take 4 years of math, 4 years of English, and these are the same classes that you got to take going to college. But how about a kid that's not going to college? He got to be stuck in these classes for 4 years, and that bothers me.
Did they just pass something downstate to push more vocational?
Yes, but that takes effect in the future.
In the future.
Yeah, right.
But in other words, they were listening a little bit to what Earl
Right,
just said.
right.
So they did pass a law to try to push them more into vocation, which is what you're saying is a good thing.
Yeah, yeah. Also, South Bend does have a school that does focus on the non-college bound students there, and so some people have been listening to that, but it's not as widespread as it was years ago.
Okay. So you're free to go. You got to pick up your wife, I think, from school.
Yes.
So. On that subject, what would be an ideal situation would be, I'm a German major, okay, and I know in Germany it's been forever that at around age 14 they decide if you're really a college track, and then they zero in on what's your vocational skill.
Right, right.
You know, so if you start learning a skill, the younger the better. I mean, of course, that's a father-son It should grow out of a relationship, really, right?
Right. Yeah, and then at the turn of the century, and in the 20s and 30s, by the age of 14, children parents and the child would know if they were college just material or not. You know, kids also had the opportunity to try a skilled trade. Most male child knew what a hammer was, knew how to use a hammer, like they knew what some of the common basic tools are. Today, a child may not know what the common basic tools are, and they may not know how to use them, you know. Now, of course, today, we have a lot of technology. Computers are the tool that kids who are college-bound and non-college-bound must know. And it's been shown by example that very young kids, they are computer savvy, but all kids may not have the skills or knowledge to be a computer engineer or a software designer, but they may have the aptitude to repair the computer. And then there is some similar knowledge up to a point needed, but the public schools have to be aware of the fact that going through school, that a fifth grader or sixth grader may not be college bound, and they may need to have more exposure to skill-based skill-based learning, meaning learning a trade, and that's not as widespread as it should be. There is some there, but it's not as widespread as it ought to be.
You're probably familiar with this, but I used to had to write a big paper on homeschooling and the history of public school, and Boston was kind of the location where Horace Mann, where public schools got going. But one of the reasons the argument for public schools was that there were children that were kind of fatherless and they weren't getting educated.
Right.
So it was set up to cover the fatherless, the children that didn't have parents to educate them.
Right.
And so, in a sense, the public school is taking the place of originally.
Right.
That aren't being fathered, which included, usually being fathered included getting a skill, included spiritual formation,
right.
included, of course, the father brought food to the table, but fathering was the whole package.
Right.
So if you're missing part of that package, well, you weren't being fathered right.
Right.
But the public school, I mean, needs to ideally recognizes what that child needs.
Right.
And a skill is one of them.
Right. Skill is one of them, and also public education is something that only started back then. It was up to the home to educate the kids prior to that, or it was up to the church to educate them, and then only the wealthy families could afford to educate their kids in a formal setting, such that public education made it possible for the orphans and the poor kids to get educated, but they still needed to have that foundation at home. And also during that time, a son spent time with his father. A son learned to hunt, learned to fish, and a daughter learned to cook, and so some of those basic learning skills today, you don't have the father showing the son how to measure the air in a tire, how to change an oil filter, or either how to use a hammer. You don't have the mother showing the daughter how to cook. Parents today think that those are demeaning skills, that they are not necessary. But if a person is to grow up and to take care of themselves, they have got to have those basic skills.
Now, one thing, reading the Puritans and the Reformed, kind of were the basic people that started the country. The father holding devotions in the home was considered, if you didn't do that, you were almost at the verge of being excommunicated.
Right,
it was
right.
considered so essential of your
Right.
role to hold devotions, because the church isn't necessarily the 2 hours you spend on
Right,
Sunday.
right.
The church starts in the home.
Right.
And
Right.
so an altar to God, so to speak, in that home was critical.
Right, right. Yes, like religion was practiced and taught in the home. It was a daily just event. How you treated your neighbor was a daily event. Children learned from their parents about how to treat their neighbor. They not only heard it in the homes, but they seen it in action from their parents. And another point of learning that parents today don't quite have is that children like to imitate what they see. Mm-hmm. Meaning that if a child sees the necessary action of how to interact with another person, and they see the respect there, then a child will do that. If a child sees violence, that's what the child will do. Children learn by watching, there. Mm-hmm. And then something that parents said at one time was, "Do as I say, not as I do."
That's not going to happen because
right.
they're going to.
Right, and then that will never happen when a child sees the actions in the home or in the neighborhood. That child will do what he sees. There is no way to that's a way of learning. That's how children learn to do things, is by seeing it.
Mm-hmm. And that's why going way back, going to Plato and Aristotle, mm-hmm. Plato was against some of the arts, like theater and that, because oftentimes you would see a theater which modeled some immorality, mm-hmm. and he knew that people were imitative.
Right.
And no matter how you tried to configure it, they tend to imitate.
Right.
And so if you portray in front of somebody some sexual looseness, right. or some violence that would go against what you would normally be teaching in your devotions,
right.
well, you want to protect the child from that.
Right.
Because bad company corrupts
right.
good manners.
Right, yeah. And you have to have a person to help to keep that moral compass straight, and then it's the parents in the home that are responsible for that. And then in the larger sense, you have the religious leaders who are charged with that, because basic just religions deals with the morals, deals with the instructions there of how we are to interact with each other, and one question that young people ask today, it is, where is my religious leader at? How is he helping me with my morals? And once again, young people will do what they see, and then if they see their religious leader straying off the path, they will not have any faith in that leader.
Well, especially if the political leaders, a lot of them are straying off the path. Now you got to counter that example.
Right.
So you need a real strong example in the church. Mm-hmm. But if the church example and the political examples are bad,
right.
how is the country going to hold together? Then the father's got to be really strong.
Right.
To counteract that.
Right. Yeah. No matter how well a parent does at home with the child, when the child sees that immoral act with the politicians and the religious leaders, and then maybe a friend of theirs, if they don't have that strong anchor at home just to ground them and to keep them going on the straight and narrow, then that child will stray. And so in the home, there has got to be that strong moral leadership there, and it would be best if the political leaders had a strong level of moral leadership too. But we've seen that is not the case, and with our just religious leaders, we have seen that it is more of a love of the money rather than a love for one another, And so when a child sees that, kid just throws up his hands and say, "What am I to do?" I'm being led astray every way.
Well, I mean, America is they called it an experiment, and it's quite a challenge. But from the old country, let's say now my great-grandfather's Norway. So let's say Norway, you might have had a small little village, and it was Lutheran was the state church. Mm-hmm. So the Lutheran church would have been the only church in town, and it would have been very simple. Okay, and the Lutheran pastor would have required of all the fathers that they have devotions in the home. So the scripture says, "Obey those who have the rule over you, mm-hmm. that watch over your soul."
Right.
Well, that pastor would get on a father that if he found out the father wasn't holding devotions, mm-hmm. he would be on him pretty strict.
Right.
And so everybody grew up with the church in the home, mm-hmm. so to speak. And when they got out together in public, they had that in common.
Right.
Okay. Instead of one bad apple spoiling the bunch,
right.
It'd be hard to corrupt them.
Right.
But now there's so many ways to corrupt.
Right.
If you're a father in the home, it's a challenge.
Right. Yeah. And going back in history, no matter what part of the world you came from, there was always a village or a small town, and then the family was the key element of that small town or village, and the village leader would ensure that the father in the home did his duties, there, and as time has gone on, and then we're in the 21st century now, it's we don't have that. We have television and the movies, video games, and a child is looking at that, and a child sees something, and he goes out and does what he saw in the video game or on television or in the movies. Then the child is scolded if he does something wrong, but a child will only do what they see, and then that type of leadership in the home and with the leaders of a village or town, that's missing now. We just don't have that village leadership or that leadership in the family. And then the families who do have it, they are the exceptions. And so it's not all a total failure, but only the ones who do exhibit those characteristics, those are the exceptions.
Right. And the classic example, let's say you're in the military, World War II, and you have a buddy, and you know how guys are in World War II, their morals usually go down,
right.
In the way they talk and that. So let's say one of your friends from the military comes to visit, and he's kind of carrying on like he did in the military, and he's, cursing in front of your children. Well, you may pull him aside, or you may say, if he came by the next time, you'd say, hold it here, I don't want my children learning that kind of behavior.
Right.
Please don't do that, because they will imitate it.
They'll imitate that, right.
And you may be strong on that, but then you may be weak as far as the TV. You may allow your children to watch something similar on TV and just go, well, that's just TV.
Yeah.
But both of them are influencing.
Right.
See, so you may be strong on protecting them here, but then weak over here.
Right.
And before you know it, your child is, being influenced.
Yeah, and then a lot of parents use the TV as a babysitter
It's
for
not
the
a good one.
kid.
There's such a thing as a bad babysitter. There's ones that molest.
Right.
And that TV, in my mind, is molesting that child because, as far as a Christian, because it's not portraying Christianity. Maybe now and then, but it slips in this, it slips in that, and before you know it, your child. Right. I mean, how dangerous do you think that is?
Yeah, and the television can be used to exercise propaganda, just to get people to think a certain way. It can be used on a child to influence that child's behavior, and a good example of bad propaganda, it is what happened during World War II with Hitler. Hitler had a huge propaganda issue going. He convinced the German people that his way of thinking was the right way, and they all fell for it, And then those who didn't follow along found themselves in the death camps, or either they came up missing one day. And then in this country, we have seen how certain TV shows show certain people in certain dispositions, and those positions are not favorable as a learning tool to the child who's watching it, but it makes money, so it's good for business, but it's bad for the child.
Well, you bring that up about Hitler. The Forever Learning Institute over at Little Flower?
Yeah.
I think they've passed out. I'm taking the class, Third Reich and Hitler. And so it's interesting, how we're learning, and he's trying to bring both sides. Whoever wins the war writes the history book.
Right.
And the Germans have been painted so evil, and of course some of that's true, but there's also a little sifting.
Oh yeah. Now, there were lots of things that the German did well. One was the road building.
Autobahn.
Right. They had a program to build roads in such that the population could easily go from one place to the other. That was the Autobahn, and in this country, we call it the interstate roads, And then that was just copied from the Germans. Also, the medical research that the Germans did, We're doing the same thing here, and so in the experimentation with drugs that the Germans did, we're doing the same thing here, and it's having the same effects, which is a bad effect as it had in Germany too. There. So there was both good and bad that did come out of what the Germans did, and also, as you said, whoever wins the war gets to write the history books. And in this country, we say that in 1776 we fought the British to gain our freedom. But in this country, there were English, Spanish, French, German, but the language we came up with was English, Just so we adopted just a lot from England there, and so and there were good and bad things that came out of that war too, and so for a child, they will be what they see.
Right. So actions speak louder than words.
Right.
And of course, the Scripture says pure religion is to visit the widow and the fatherless in their distress.
Right.
Of course, you could. Hebrews says if you're without chastisement, you're a bastard child. So just because you have a physical father doesn't mean you're not being deprived a little bit. Because if he's not fulfilling his duty, but not to have a father there physically is certainly not the ideal.
Right.
And a lot of these children in the school come from homes that are broken.
Right.
And of course, if the community can find a way to strengthen, overcome the broken home, everybody's going to win.
Right, yeah. And also in a broken home, a mother can be just as strong as a father in ensuring that that child just receives the proper training. But somewhere along the line, there has got to be some manly influence that comes in just to reinforce what that mother has taught that child, such that somewhere there is a father figure that is in that child's life.
Right. I mean, I don't know, this is a bad example, but like when you played football at a young age, we had all the gear. Just because you had all the fancy gear didn't necessarily make you a better player.
Right.
Okay, and just because you are from a single mother home, that you can't, I can't win because I don't have a dad.
Right.
You can't go that way.
Right.
Sure, it's not going to be easier. It's going to be harder because you don't have all the best,
Right.
that goes along with it.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean you should give up. I mean, a fatherless home is not the ideal. And when you encourage your daughter to get married, or she's going to get married, you want her to stay married. You're not hoping.
Right.
I mean, you don't want her to get divorced and then have to raise the kids by herself.
Right.
So you analyze and say, honey, I don't think you should marry that guy.
Yeah.
I mean, right? Doesn't that
that
plays a part?
Yeah, that's right. And also in raising kids, sometimes the more you push them towards one idea, like the harder they push back on you, and they do just the opposite. But as long as the child will listen down the road, their eyes will be open, and they'll say, maybe he was right, maybe I shouldn't have done this, and my experience has been a father in the home has to demonstrate that respect for the wife and the children there. And the children watching that, they learn from that. Not only will they be told that, and they will hear it coming from the religious leader, but they will also see it, and that they will know that it works, such that that is the behavior that they will imitate then, and it's difficult raising kids.
Well, I mean, sometimes you got to break it down. In a way, you could say, if you and your wife love and fear God, kids will pick that up.
Right.
And what is success? I mean, if you for the husband and wife. I mean, when you get together with your pastor and say, "What is success?" Well, if my children end up loving and fearing God, isn't that close to success?
Yeah.
You know, well, he's got his PhD and now he's making $300,000, but he doesn't go to church.
Yeah.
And he doesn't fear God. Well, a healthy family would say, you know, I'm really worried about this.
Yeah, yeah, and if that person doesn't have God in their life, the children will see that in the way he lives. You know, he will often say things, do a lot of swearing in the home. Do things to not respect the wife. He will try to live that worldly life, you know, and then the children, they will then start to live that worldly life, and I think every parent somehow wants their kids to be successful, but success is not necessarily defined by how much money they earn. Every parent wants their child to grow up and to be able to operate in the environment they're in and to be successful in operating in it, meaning not to let the environment bog them down or to hold them captive, but to successfully operate in the life environment that they're in.
Right. I mean, it kind of goes back. I mean, you know, if everything falls short, you can always go back to the original. You know, with Adam, you know, he was to take dominion and till that garden. Mm-hmm. So in a way, God expects us to get control.
Right,
you know,
right.
Take control of your own desires.
Right.
Take control of your garden.
Right.
And work at it.
Right.
And because of the curse, you know, by the sweat of your brow. So a lot of this is taking up your cross daily, really.
Right. Right.
And people might think there's an easy way.
Yeah. Yeah. And then people often leave biblical teaching out of their life, which is an error. You have got to be aware of biblical teaching. You have got to follow biblical teaching, that's needed in order to achieve success. And today, success is measured by how many cars do I have, what type of clothing do I have, how many pairs of gym shoes do I have, did I go to the club on the weekend,
or how pretty my wife is.
Right.
But doesn't mean she's a good wife.
Right. And in some social circles, that's called having a trophy wife, you know. And so people learn late that having good health is important, and they learn late that that having good moral character is important, and a lot of people who have went that wrong way, once they get to the latter years of their life, they will recognize that. Then they will try to tell younger people, if I had it to do it over again, like I wouldn't have done it this way, but younger people see how they made it to the point they are in their lives, and they still want to imitate that. They don't want to learn from their words of wisdom about, don't do it this way. Like, my health is failing. This is why, I am not happy. This is why, and younger people still want to do what they see.
Right, do what they see, and that's why the TV or whatever can, they call it a TV program. Well, oftentimes that program is rewiring
Right.
and reprogramming them, and they don't recognize it, but they leave different.
Right.
Just on even one show or one theater piece or one movie.
Yeah.
And most of these people are not Christian that
Right.
produce it.
Yeah.
So they less and less of a Christian worldview. Because what did Jesus said? He said, heaven and earth will pass away, but
Right.
my words will not.
Yeah.
And he said, I didn't come to judge, but the word that I spoke will be your judge.
Great.
So Judgment Day is waiting everybody. And if you failed to pass that test, all your successes in the world.
Right. Yeah, and also when it comes time for that Judgment Day, and it's time for you to appear just before God, it's not going to be you trying to plead your case, because God already has all the evidence of the things that you have done, how you lived your life. It's just going to be you appearing there, and it's going to be similar to Christ telling God, well, I don't really know this guy, and it's like like from that point you just fall into an abyss full of fire.
Right. And there's several guys in the club that are have quite a testimony about how Jesus totally opened the path, shed the light on them, and there's no going back.
Right.
So it's so powerful when you realize, you come to grips that, I'm going to die and I'm going to face judgment. And so then you redefine your notion of success.
Right.
Okay? Because you could have wrong concepts of success.
Right. Yeah. Young people think that they will live forever, and they aren't. And then some young people think that their lives are so bad that in the next 6 months they will die. So they don't prepare for any future. But sooner or later, people will have their eyes open, and then they will see the error of their ways, and it's good that happens when you have your health and you can do something about it. But most of the time, it happens when a person is in bad health and they can't do anything else just except to just suffer.
Right. So we've called the show Community Concerns, and we did emphasize that the purpose of school under the Indiana Constitution is to encourage moral improvement by all suitable means. And we have been talking on the moral issues. How does a community as a whole lay a hold of this fundamental principle of a republic? A republic has to have moral citizens to kind of go forward.
Right. Each person is going to have to reach within themselves and to say, I need to speak up. We have a silent majority. People will see wrong, they will sit by and say nothing. Individually, with each other, they will voice their opinion as if it's wrong, but in a crowd, they will never speak up on it. And then that comes from a moral weakness that people have. Similar to what was done during World War II in Germany. Soldiers would go into a house, take a family out, shoot the family. The rest of the neighbors would just stand there and watch. They would not voice their opinion. Likewise, today, you can have some immoral issues there. Parents will sit by and say nothing. It is that silent majority that is the problem.
But they're not fearing God properly, because I think Ezekiel said, if you don't warn the wicked, their blood is on you.
Right.
And there is going to be something like that, even though we're in the New Testament and that's Old Testament, but there's something, God will hold us accountable for not warning the wicked, but it's dangerous to warn the wicked.
Right.
It takes some courage.
Right. And your religious leader is held accountable, but also every person is held accountable too, you know.
But the religious leader is the one that said, we're taking that hill.
Right.
And he's willing to die first as like an officer, like they used to lead the charge.
Right.
But if he's afraid to lead the charge, well, he shouldn't be the leader.
Right.
You know, and then we're to follow.
Right.
And therefore a moral path, a moral word can go forth.
Yeah. And also you cannot lead from behind the pack. You have to be out in front.
Right. And that's a challenge to me. It's easy to say it. And may God give us courage. But this is Citizens for Community Media. And a lot of towns have public access. South Bend is blessed to have public access. And we encourage you to call your councilman and the county councilman, city councilman, and encourage them to keep public access here in South Bend going forward. So this is Peter Helland. Earl Townsend was our guest, and Robert Smith. So till next time.